In the dead of night, a massive fire broke out at the narrator's barn, pulling emergency crews into a frenzy. However, the barn was no ordinary structure, but a secret federal canine training facility disguised as a run-down farm building. Karen, a hostile neighbor obsessed with control, had set the fire in a reckless act of petty vengeance. Her impulsive crime exposed deeper layers of her vendetta against the narrator, rooted in resentment and a thirst for power. This catastrophic event marked the beginning of Karen's spectacular downfall and a monumental shift for the entire community. How did such an unbelievable story unfold in a seemingly quiet town? Let us take you back to the night when everything changed. At exactly 4:13 a.m., the entire valley was torn from sleep by the shrieking wail of sirens, and the sky, once peacefully ink-black, now burned an unholy shade of orange that painted every tree, roof, and sleeping car in a surreal light. I stood barefoot in my driveway, the rough gravel biting into my skin, smoke burning my throat, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. My barn was on fire, but it was not just the flames leaping into the sky or the black smoke curling against the stars that had brought every police cruiser, fire engine, and a convoy of ominous black SUVs screaming up the road with lights flashing like a battlefield. It was what was inside the barn that turned a simple fire into a national incident. What Karen, my self-appointed nemesis, did not know when she snuck over with her gas cans and half-baked sense of righteous fury was that she had not merely torched an old building. She had ignited a federally protected, top-secret National Police K-9 training ground, hidden in plain sight behind the weathered shell of an old farmstead. As spotlights swept across the thickening smoke and handlers screamed commands into radios, highly trained dogs, the same ones bred to hunt explosives and chase down fugitives for SWAT teams across the nation, tore through the haze with deadly precision. In the middle of this chaotic, roaring storm was Karen herself, wearing nothing but a rumpled nightgown and a pair of pink flip-flops, bolting toward the woods like a deer with a wolf pack on her heels. For a few precious, dumbstruck seconds, the world froze. The barking, the pounding boots, the mechanical screech of tires on gravel, it all blurred into a surreal painting of madness and adrenaline. Half in horror, half in a kind of twisted awe, I could only stand there thinking, she actually did it. Karen had gone and declared war on the United States government because she did not like the way my barn looked from her kitchen window. It had not always been like this. 2 years ago, when I first bought that crumbling farmstead on the outskirts of our polished suburban neighborhood, the property was a disaster. The barn sagged against the skyline like an old drunk ready to topple over, and the fields were a wild tangle of knee-high weeds and hidden rusting junk left behind by generations long gone. The neighbors wore tight, polite smiles when they passed, careful masks to hide their disdain, but Karen never bothered with a mask. From the moment I moved in, she made it her personal crusade to drive me out, treating me like some contaminant, an eyesore marring her perfect little world of manicured lawns and regulation-approved mailbox designs. She would march past my property daily, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her beady eyes scanning like a radar system set to find faults. She made a show of jotting down furious notes on a clipboard, reporting every imagined infraction to the county, from dogs off leashes to the grievous offense of installing a slightly too bright porch light. Once, she even left a professionally printed sign on my mailbox reading, "This is not a junkyard," a message so dripping with passive-aggressive venom that even my mailman apologized when handing me the day's letters. I tried to stay patient, truly I did. I rebuilt the barn painstakingly, selecting weathered wood to preserve its rustic charm and sanding down every beam by hand. I avoided loud parties, kept the fields trimmed, mended fences even before they needed fixing. None of it mattered, because Karen did not hate what I did. She hated that she could not control me. Then, About a year ago, opportunity knocked in the form of an old friend from my college days, now working in federal law enforcement. He needed an out-of-the-way place, quiet, private, a location invisible to the casual observer, but tough enough to withstand serious operations. A canine initiative, secret enough that even the local sheriff's office would not be in the loop. At first, it sounded insane. Let a bunch of federal agents and bomb-sniffing dogs use my property as their secret training ground? But the more I thought about it, the more it fit. After months of vetting, background checks deeper than my own memories, endless inspections, and signing enough NDAs to make my lawyer wince, my humble barn was transformed. To the outside world, it remained a picturesque relic. Inside, it became a fortress, reinforced walls, climate-controlled kennels, advanced obstacle courses, and a state-of-the-art surveillance system that would put some small cities to shame. We moved with stealth. Unmarked trucks slipped in and out during dead hours. Trainers rotated shifts at odd times. Dogs were shuffled so quietly that even curious eyes would struggle to catch a pattern. For a time, it was perfect. Karen occasionally peered suspiciously from behind her lace curtains, but with no obvious proof, she could do little more than scowl. Until she decided the barn was an eyesore ruining her precious view. That was when her obsession escalated from irritating to dangerous. She accused me of running an illegal business. She called city inspectors so often that they eventually blocked her number. She even tried following one of the unmarked trucks, but when it pulled into the sheriff's department lot, she turned tail so fast her tires squealed. At one particularly unhinged HOA meeting, Karen stood up, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, and proposed that the barn be forcibly removed for neighborhood beautification. People laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. It should have ended there. But Karen never knew when to quit. Instead, she stewed and plotted, her resentment fermenting into something truly dangerous. 2 nights before the fire, I caught her snooping around my fence line with a flashlight, peering through cracks like a cartoon burglar. When I called out to her, she shrieked about inspecting for rats and stormed off, her flashlight beam jittering wildly. I filed a report immediately. The feds shrugged it off, joking that it was just typical Karen antics. None of us, not a single one, thought she would go nuclear. When the fire started, I did not even grasp the danger at first. My house alarm went off, the shrill scream jolting me awake, heart hammering in my chest. Smoke crept in under the doors, thick and acrid. By the time I stumbled outside, the emergency protocols had already kicked in. Hidden steel doors slammed shut, cutting off critical sections of the facility. Sprinklers blasted like geysers, dousing the surrounding grass. K9 handlers barked rapid-fire orders into radios as tactical teams assembled with terrifying speed. And there, caught in the glare of security floodlights, was Karen. Dragging a half-empty gas can across the slick grass, slipping and cursing under her breath, looking every bit the petty villain she truly was. For one absurd moment, it seemed like she might actually make it to the tree line. But then the K9 teams fanned out like a dark tide. A massive Belgian Malinois named Vader, muscles rippling under his black coat, streaked through the smoke and brought Karen down in one brutal, beautiful tackle. She screamed, a sound so raw and animalistic that it cut through the chaos like a blade. Federal agents swarmed in, slapping cuffs on her wrists while she wailed about community standards and property values as if either could shield her now. As the fire department fought the flames and emergency teams secured the perimeter, I stood frozen, staring at the wreckage, the roaring inferno, and the absurdly fitting end of Karen's long war against me. She had tried to clean up the neighborhood by committing felony arson against a classified federal facility. She had crossed a line so bright, so violently visible, that even her most loyal HOA followers could not pretend otherwise. And the most delicious irony was this: Karen had no idea yet just how deep the hole she had dug for herself truly went. The barn fire would be contained by dawn. But the investigation it triggered would unleash a storm the likes of which Karen and our entire sleepy little community would never forget. The morning after the fire dawned heavy and strange, the air thick with the stench of charred wood and melted plastic, as if the valley itself was still trying to process what had happened just a few hours before. Smoke hung low over the rooftops, and the neighborhood buzzed with frantic, half-baked rumors that raced from porch to porch faster than wildfire. Some claimed it had been a terrorist attack, convinced they had heard gunfire mixed with the sirens. Others whispered wild theories about a secret meth lab exploding under cover of darkness. One particularly imaginative neighbor even swore up and down that she had seen black-clad snipers crawling through her rose bushes, preparing for a siege. Karen, somehow still wrapped in her own delusions of righteousness, had managed to post bail before sunrise and immediately launched into a full-scale smear campaign, telling anyone who would listen that the real criminal was me. According to her, I had staged the fire myself in a desperate bid for attention, planning to rake in some fantastical insurance payout while simultaneously destroying the so-called visual harmony of the neighborhood. The wild part was not just that she was saying these things. It was how many people she managed to corner with her endless, hysterical monologues. She hit the local Facebook groups first, tagging news stations, city officials, and even random strangers unlucky enough to stumble across her posts. She demanded an immediate investigation into my property, describing me as a rogue landowner operating under the thin, laughable disguise of farming, insisting that only a full community-led inspection could uncover the extent of my so-called crimes. Unfortunately for Karen, the people she kept pestering were not bored municipal workers. They were the same federal agencies that had spent months setting up the canine training operation and who now had a very personal reason to dig deep into everything surrounding the fire. The fire investigators arrived early, long before the dew had evaporated from the grass, black SUVs and boxy fire trucks rumbling up my gravel driveway while uniformed agents stepped out. Their faces a mixture of grim focus and tight-lipped professionalism. Karen, ever the showman in the worst possible sense, donned a new floral sundress and stormed onto the scene, clipboard in hand, as if she had been elected queen of disaster response. She marched straight up to the lead investigator, a tall man with a scowl so permanent it looked carved into his face, and introduced herself with a bright, nauseating smile as the acting president of the HOA. She loudly declared that she would be personally overseeing the investigation to guarantee fairness and transparency. I nearly dropped my coffee cup when I saw it. The investigator listened for approximately 30 seconds before giving her a nod so brief it could have been mistaken for a muscle twitch, then calmly, firmly, turned her away without so much as raising his voice. Karen, clearly unused to being ignored, huffed back toward the crowd that had gathered at the end of the street, muttering dire warnings about property values and hidden dangers as if she were reciting gospel. I thought maybe that would be the end of her performance, but of course it was not. Karen spotted a younger agent working near the smoldering remains of the barn, a woman dressed in plain black tactical pants and a nondescript jacket, scanning the wreckage with a handheld device. Believing she had found a weaker target, Karen pounced, unleashing a rant about government overreach and demanding that the agent show her identification and submit to a community oversight committee that, needless to say, did not exist. The young woman smiled politely, nodded as if indulging a confused child, and handed Karen a small card. I did not know what was printed on that card, but the effect was immediate and spectacular. Karen's face drained of all color, her lips moving soundlessly like a fish gasping for air, before she muttered something about needing to make a call and practically sprinted away, her clipboard bouncing awkwardly against her side. Later, I learned the woman was not just an investigator, but a senior agent from Homeland Security specializing in federal infrastructure protection. Someone who had the legal authority to shut down an entire airport with a phone call if she deemed it necessary. If Karen had any survival instincts at all, she would have stayed quiet after that. But Karen was built from a special brand of stubborn stupidity. For the next hour, she paced the sidewalk like a caged tiger, whispering conspiracy theories to anyone who would meet her gaze, spinning wilder and wilder tales about secret operations, neighborhood sabotage, and the imminent collapse of civilization. Meanwhile, the Real investigation was moving at lightning speed. Fire marshals, forensic specialists, and federal agents descended on the property, combing every inch of the barn ruins with meticulous care. The sprinkler system had done its job well, limiting the worst damage to one corner of the barn, and it did not take long for them to find the smoking guns. 2 melted gasoline containers, still bearing faded neighborhood garage sale stickers, were pulled from the ashes, and one of them, almost unbelievably, had a faint, smudged mark scrawled on it: Karen's initials. The absurdity of it would have been hilarious if the consequences were not so deadly serious. Every piece of evidence was photographed, cataloged, bagged, and loaded into the back of unmarked vans that disappeared down the road without a sound. When agents approached me for a statement, I laid it all out, from Karen's long history of harassment to her flashlight prowling just 2 nights before the fire. The agents nodded patiently, but it became clear very quickly that they already knew more than I was telling them. That was the moment it clicked in my brain like a snapped branch. They were not treating this like an accidental fire or a petty neighborhood dispute. They were treating it like a federal attack. And Karen, poor, clueless Karen, had just written her name onto a list you never wanted to be on. As midday crept over the valley, the tension among the residents thickened into something you could practically slice with a knife. The air shimmered with heat and anxiety. Karen, desperate to wrest back control of the narrative, called an emergency HOA meeting right there on the sidewalk in front of her house. About 20 confused, sweaty residents showed up, fanning themselves with folded papers and casting nervous glances toward the line of black SUVs still parked at odd angles along the street. Karen climbed onto a cheap metal folding chair, grabbed a battered megaphone, and launched into a speech that would have been hilarious if it had not been so dangerously deranged. She announced that the community was under siege by rogue elements determined to destroy their way of life. She accused me, by name, of harboring terrorist operations and claimed that unless immediate action was taken, our neighborhood would soon fall under martial law. She barely made it through the second paragraph before 2 agents, moving with the quiet inevitability of an incoming tide, approached her. One flashed a badge. The other calmly asked her to step down and accompany them for questioning. Karen shrieked about freedom of speech and citizen rights, clutching the megaphone like a life preserver as they gently but firmly guided her toward a waiting black SUV. It was not technically an arrest, just a detainment for questioning, but the optics were catastrophic. Word spread faster than wildfire on a windy day. By late afternoon, the street was lined with news vans, reporters elbowing each other for better camera angles, shouting questions at anyone who looked remotely connected to the drama. I stayed inside, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the circus unfold from my kitchen window. Karen's husband, a mousy man who had spent most of his marriage lurking in the shadows, finally emerged to try and control the damage. He stammered and sweated in front of microphones, trying to assure reporters that they had no idea the barn was anything more than an abandoned building. Cameras captured him shouting we thought it was just an old barn before the feed cut to footage of tactical canine units leaping through smoke. Meanwhile, inside the mobile command vans parked along my driveway, agents were assembling a damning portrait of Karen's activities. Security footage from hidden cameras disguised as birdhouses, metal signs, and even fake mailboxes revealed Karen trespassing at all hours, dragging gas cans, fiddling with lighters, and worse. Recording videos of the fire's first flames with a triumphant little smirk on her face. There was no question of intent. There was no plausible deniability. Karen had planned this. When they pulled her online history, the picture grew even darker. She had been posting on fringe conspiracy forums for months, spinning paranoid fantasies about my property being a front for foreign insurgents, warning about secret armies assembling under everyone's noses, encouraging neighbors to take preemptive action to protect their suburban way of life. In one particularly insane post, she even accused my German Shepherd of being a bioengineered attack animal designed for espionage. If Karen thought she was going to spin herself as a confused, well-meaning citizen in court, she had another thing coming. By the time the sun set that evening, the story had moved beyond the neighborhood, beyond the local city news, and into national headlines. The woman who burned down a federal canine training facility because she did not like the view from her kitchen window was now public enemy number one in the eyes of every major news outlet. And the best part, the truly perfect cherry on top, was that Karen still had absolutely no idea how much worse it was about to get. Karen's arrest should have been the end of the madness, but in reality, it was just the spark that lit a bonfire nobody could put out. Her arraignment hearing was supposed to be a short formality, a box-ticking exercise to officially list her charges, set bail conditions, and get on with the inevitable march toward trial. Instead, it turned into a circus so outrageous that everyone who crammed into that courthouse would end up retelling the story for years to come. By the time the hearing started, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, curious locals, and even tourists who had caught wind of the saga through social media. Late-night hosts had already been joking about Karen for days, and memes featuring her wild-eyed mugshot were circulating faster than wildfire. Some people even showed up wearing t-shirts that said "Justice for Barnyard Freedom" and "No More Clipboard Tyranny." Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with restless energy, folding chairs squeaking, reporters whispering, the bailiff constantly shushing the growing crowd. Karen shuffled into view wearing an ill-fitting gray blazer 2 sizes too big, a skirt that looked hastily grabbed from a clearance rack, and an expression of sour defiance that could have curdled fresh milk. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he had not slept since the fire, guided her forward with the air of someone leading a particularly stubborn mule. Karen tried to hold her head high, but every time a camera flash popped, she flinched, her hands clenching the straps of her worn-out purse tighter. The judge, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and the patience of a kindergarten teacher on a field trip, called the court to order. The prosecutor, a crisp, sharp-eyed woman in a dark blue suit, stood up and began to list the charges. Each word was like a hammer strike against Karen's paper-thin defenses: arson of federal property, destruction of classified government facilities, obstruction of official government operations, endangerment of federal agents, unauthorized surveillance of secure sites, potential espionage under the Domestic Security Act. With each charge, the murmurs from the crowd grew louder until the judge had to bang his gavel sharply just to restore order. Karen's face, once flushed with stubborn pride, paled visibly. She stared at the prosecutor like she could not quite believe the words being spoken, like maybe if she squinted hard enough they would morph into something less devastating. When the prosecutor calmly described the hidden cameras found in decorative birdhouses around my property, a ripple of laughter broke through the tension like a crack in glass. When she moved on to describe the surveillance drone hidden inside a child's toy airplane and the massive spreadsheet Karen had compiled with absurd notes like possible secret government pipeline next to a photo of my garden hose, even the judge had to hide a smile behind his hand. Karen's lawyer tried to object on grounds of character assassination, but was swiftly overruled. The evidence was overwhelming, an avalanche too vast and heavy for any courtroom antics to stop. When given a chance to speak, Karen seized the moment like a drowning woman grabbing at a straw. She launched into a rambling monologue about shadow governments, neighborhood preservation, and how she was the last true patriot standing against suburban decay. She even accused the judge of bias, loudly claiming that his dog barked at her whenever she walked by his house, suggesting it was some sort of coded threat. The entire courtroom erupted in laughter so loud and uncontrolled that it took almost 5 minutes for the judge to bang his gavel back to order. Even the bailiff had tears in his eyes from trying not to laugh. By the time Karen finished her tirade, any shred of credibility she might have salvaged was gone like smoke on the wind. The judge, wearing an expression of exhausted disbelief, ordered that Karen be remanded into custody pending further psychological evaluation. As the deputies moved to escort her out, Karen shrieked about property rights, secret communists, and betrayal, her voice echoing down the marble halls like some deranged opera singer's final aria. While Karen's world was crumbling in spectacular public fashion, my own life was transforming at a speed that left me dizzy. Construction crews arrived before the court hearing was even over, their trucks packed with steel beams, high-tensile fencing, specialized training equipment, and enough concrete to build a small fortress. Within days, the scorched remains of the old barn were cleared away, leaving a blank canvas for the new facility. It was not just going to be another hidden training center. It was going to be a fully sanctioned, nationally recognized canine operations headquarters. Reinforced walls rose from the dirt, topped with security systems so advanced that even birds flying overhead would trigger alerts. Training yards were laid out with intricate obstacle courses, scent trails, and urban search grids. Dormitories were built to house visiting handlers and trainers from across the country. Plans were drawn for an on-site veterinary clinic, a command center, and even a helicopter landing pad. The entire property pulsed with purpose and energy, a phoenix rising from the ashes of Karen's stupidity. Meanwhile, the media frenzy refused to die. News crews camped outside the entrance to the neighborhood, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous barn rebirth or snag an interview with the man who had somehow become the unintentional face of suburban resilience. I declined every request. I had no interest in being famous. It was enough to know that the truth was out there, that people understood now what had really happened. Karen, for her part, doubled down on crazy. Even from jail, she dictated rants to her few remaining loyalists, who dutifully posted them online. She gave rambling interviews to fringe conspiracy blogs, claiming that she had been framed by deep state agents hiding under the guise of friendly neighborhood dogs. She spun tales of secret mind control experiments, coded messages in lawn decorations, and clandestine meetings at the local grocery store. Nobody with half a brain took her seriously, but the sheer volume of her madness kept her name circulating like a bad smell that refused to dissipate. Inside the neighborhood, life began to settle into a new and astonishingly peaceful rhythm. The HOA, once a tool of Karen's personal vendettas, was disbanded entirely after a unanimous vote by residents who had finally had enough of bureaucracy weaponized against them. A retired Army colonel, a no-nonsense man with a booming laugh and a deep love of barbecue, stepped up to organize a new community council based on transparency, fairness, and the radical notion that people could be trusted to manage their own lawns without threats of fines or eviction. The atmosphere changed almost overnight. Fences that had been built out of spite and suspicion were torn down. Kids played freely in front yards without parents fretting over violation notices. Neighbors who had barely exchanged nods before now gathered for block parties, movie nights, and volunteer projects. The transformation was so profound that it felt almost dreamlike, as if we had all been holding our breath for years and were only now learning how to exhale again. Karen's house, foreclosed after she failed to pay mounting legal fees, stood empty for months, its once pristine flower beds overtaken by wild grass and dandelions. Eventually, Homeland Security bought the property as part of their expansion plans for the new K9 facility. Bulldozers flattened what remained of Karen's suburban dream and replaced it with a state-of-the-art agility field where German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois soared over jumps and tore through tunnels with joyful abandon. Every bark that echoed across that field felt like a tiny, perfect piece of justice. Every laugh that bubbled up from spectators felt like a wound healing a little more. Karen had set out to destroy something she did not understand, and in doing so, She had unwittingly created something better, stronger, and infinitely more meaningful than her petty ambitions ever could have achieved. As the final nails were hammered into place and the last patches of grass were laid down, the new facility opened with a quiet ceremony. No speeches, no grandstanding, just a simple gathering of handlers, dogs, agents, and neighbors who had weathered a ridiculous storm and come out the other side better for it. I stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching a young Malinois clear a towering jump with effortless grace, and felt a deep, satisfying peace settle over me. Karen had thought she could control the world with a clipboard and a bad attitude. She had thought she could bully and bluff her way into reshaping reality. But in the end, all she had really accomplished was setting herself on fire and lighting the way for the rest of us to build something extraordinary from the ashes. She was gone, a ghost story for future generations to chuckle over, a cautionary tale told around neighborhood fire pits and at backyard barbecues. And as I watched the sunset turn the fields gold and heard the laughter of kids racing alongside working dogs, I realized something even more profound. We had not just survived Karen. We had grown because of her. We had learned what real community looked like when you stripped away fear and control. And we had learned that sometimes the worst storms could clear the air in ways you never imagined possible. Months passed and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, a quieter, freer, more joyful kind of life that none of us had realized we were missing until it arrived like a fresh breeze after a summer thunderstorm. Without Karen's constant interference, the very air seemed lighter, as if a heavy, invisible weight had been lifted from our collective shoulders. Streets once patrolled by clipboard-wielding busybodies were now filled with the sound of children's laughter, the scent of backyard barbecues, and the easy comfort of neighbors stopping to chat without a shred of suspicion in their eyes. It was incredible to watch how quickly a wounded place could heal when fear and pettiness were finally chased away. The canine training facility grew steadily, but instead of being the disruptive menace Karen had predicted, it became a source of community pride. The sleek, well-trained dogs and their dedicated handlers were a familiar sight, jogging the trails, running drills in the open fields, always moving with a focus and discipline that inspired respect rather than fear. Saturday mornings sometimes featured open demonstrations, where families brought lawn chairs and coffee to watch the dogs perform search exercises, obstacle courses, and bite work with breathtaking precision. Watching kids cheer and clap as a German Shepherd completed a flawless scent find was a far cry from the paranoid whispers that once plagued every corner of the neighborhood. It was amazing how something that had once been seen as a threat had become a beloved part of our daily lives. Pride blossomed where resentment once festered. A sense of belonging rooted itself deep into the soil, watered by trust and laughter instead of suspicion and control. Karen, meanwhile, became something of a ghost story, a whispered cautionary tale passed down at block parties and neighborhood potlucks. Newcomers would eventually hear about the woman who tried to fight the government with a clipboard and a gallon of gasoline, and depending on who told the story, the details would grow increasingly absurd and hilarious. Some said she had ridden into battle on a flaming lawnmower, others that she had tried to dig secret tunnels under the neighborhood to expose the imaginary conspiracy she was so obsessed with. The truth, wild as it already was, barely needed any embellishment. Her name became shorthand for overzealous behavior. If anyone at a meeting started nitpicking too hard about fence heights or complaining about the color of someone's mailbox, it was not uncommon to hear someone murmur, "Careful, you are going full Karen," and set the whole group laughing. Her old property, once a perfectly maintained showpiece of suburban conformity, was now the crown jewel of the K9 facility, transformed into a massive agility course complete with towering jumps, tunnel systems, and scent walls. Handlers from all over the state came to train there, turning the site of Karen's downfall into a living, breathing monument to resilience and second chances. I would often stand at the edge of the field during late afternoons, arms crossed, watching the dogs soar over obstacles, tongues lolling in happy concentration, tails wagging furiously. Sometimes, in the back of my mind, I would wonder if Karen ever drove by, sitting low in a borrowed car, peering over the steering wheel at the future she had tried so desperately to destroy. Part of me hoped she did, not out of cruelty, but because there was a certain poetic justice in knowing that her greatest act of sabotage had blossomed into something beautiful she could never erase, no matter how many times she told herself she had been right. Life moved on for me as well. The payout from the government for the land and the bonus offered for my cooperation and discretion allowed me to expand my home, turning the once modest farmhouse into a warm, welcoming place filled with friends, family, and laughter. I added a real guest house, a project I took particular satisfaction in after years of fighting bogus accusations of illegal rentals. Old friends who had once raised eyebrows at my decision to buy a crumbling relic on the edge of nowhere now marveled at the transformation, their skepticism replaced by awe. Invitations to visit often came with half-joking warnings about dodging attack dogs or being frisked at the gate. I welcomed the jokes. Humor was something that had been sorely missing during the darkest times, and now it felt good to laugh again without bitterness clinging to the edges. Even better than the changes to my home were the changes within the neighborhood itself. Without the constant surveillance and harassment, people started reaching out to one another in ways that had seemed impossible before. Fences that had been built as emotional and physical barriers came down. Neighbors who had barely exchanged curt nods now invited each other over for weekend dinners, helped fix fences, traded gardening tips, and organized carpooling for school events. We hosted block parties that grew larger and livelier with every passing month, the smell of barbecue mingling with the shrieks of delighted children and the thump of music drifting through open windows. Without the iron fist of a tyrannical HOA bearing down on us, people realized that community flourished best when trust, not fear, guided their actions. There was a kind of magic in seeing the natural goodness of people emerge when they were simply left alone to be decent without being policed at every turn. No one missed the endless violation notices tucked into mailboxes, the surprise inspections under flimsy pretenses, the heavy-handed threats couched in legalese. We had learned that given space and respect, most people would take care of their homes and their neighbors with pride and goodwill. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in shades of molten gold, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee in hand and watched a training session unfold on the field where Karen's house once stood. A group of handlers moved in perfect sync with their canine partners, barking sharp commands that were met with eager obedience. In the middle of it all, a clumsy young pup misjudged a jump and tumbled into a heap of legs and wagging tails, sparking a wave of laughter so pure and spontaneous that it echoed across the valley like music. At that moment, I realized something that had been building quietly in the back of my mind for a long time. Karen had tried to control everything around her because she had been afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of things she could not dictate, could not predict, could not mold to fit her narrow vision of the world. In the end, her fear had been her undoing. She had tried to crush what she did not understand, and in doing so, she had inadvertently created a space where trust, joy, and community could take root and grow stronger than ever. Later that night, I pulled out an old battered notebook from the back of a drawer, flipping through the pages that documented every violation, every threat, every ridiculous citation from the worst of the HOA wars. It was staggering to see it all laid out, a heavy, ugly testament to just how exhausting it had been to live under constant scrutiny. For a moment, I considered tossing the whole thing into a bonfire as a final act of catharsis. But in the end, I tucked it away again, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. A reminder that freedom is not just about grand victories or dramatic courtroom triumphs. Sometimes it is about enduring the slow, grinding pressure of petty tyranny until it collapses under its own absurdity. It is about holding on to who you are even when everything around you tries to grind you down into something smaller, something more obedient, something less alive. Word eventually trickled back that Karen had moved several towns over, renting a small, dingy apartment in a place far from any HOA-managed community. Rumor had it she worked part-time cleaning office buildings and spent her evenings muttering bitterly about the neighbors who had betrayed her. Some said she tried to start a new neighborhood committee in her apartment complex, only to be laughed out of the room before she could finish her first sentence. Whether that was true or just a story that grew with retelling, I did not really care. Karen's chapter in our story was well and truly closed. As autumn rolled in and the fields turned from green to amber, the canine facility threw a public thank you event for the community. Food trucks lined the field, live music floated on the crisp breeze, and families sprawled on blankets to watch demonstration after demonstration of the dogs doing what they did best. I was asked to give a short speech, and as I stood on a makeshift stage looking out over a sea of smiling faces, I felt a surge of emotion so strong it caught me off guard. It was not pride in what I had accomplished personally. It was pride in all of us. Pride in a community that had survived something ugly and absurd and come out stronger, closer, and infinitely better for it. I kept my speech short. I thanked the handlers, the dogs, the agents who had helped turn disaster into opportunity. I thanked the neighbors who had chosen unity over division. And as I closed, I said the only thing that truly needed saying. Sometimes life hands you a Karen, but if you are lucky and maybe just a little stubborn, you can turn that Karen into something extraordinary. The applause that followed was not thunderous or frenzied. It was warm, genuine. It was the kind of applause that comes from people who know what it means to fight for something and to win not with anger or bitterness, but with perseverance, laughter, and hope. As the sun set behind the hills and the air filled with the joyous barking of dogs leaping over jumps and diving through tunnels, I realized one simple, powerful truth. We had already faced the worst kind of enemy, the kind that hides behind rules and fake smiles, the kind that believes they can control the world with fear and paperwork. And we had won. Together. Stronger than before. And whatever challenges lay ahead, we would be ready. Because once you survive a hurricane made of pure pettiness and come out standing a little taller, a little stronger, and a lot wiser, there is nothing left in this world that can ever truly knock you down again.